Good morning, everyone. Let's talk about post First World Britain. Yes, we talked about early 20th century and the changes that are about to happen in the British scene. Now let's talk about First World War and whatever happened in Britain as a result of First World War or during First World War. As you know, the First World War between two powers, and as a result of First World War, you can see that Europe is split into two major powers. What are these powers? Yes, it is between the Central Powers and Allied Powers. Allied Powers, the British, the French and the Russians, and US also helping them. You can see that later US joined and US helping them. And I would ask you to remember some of the films, at least to remember to give you some kind of images to your mind. See 2017 film Wonder Woman. You can see some scenes of World War here. See Diana is crossing the trench and taking the bullets, and she's celebrating after releasing a village, and Steve and Diana falling in love in that village. And I hope you can remember some of the sweet scenes in that movie. So that is actually that was the thing that really happened in First World War. Not the Diana and Steve love affair I'm talking about, the battle scenes, yes, of course. And yes, the Central Powers were Germany and Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and I think Ottoman Empire, the Southeast Europe and that part. But mainly Germany. Germany was the enemy of almost all these people here. So yes, so there was a hostility towards everything that was German during that time. There was hostility towards German-made products, German relatives. The Britishers were really ashamed of admitting that if they had any connections with Germany, they really took it as a matter of their patriotism. And see, when we talk about British patriotism, I should mention here that see, George V, that is Queen Victoria's son, Edward VII's son is George V. He was the one who was ruling at that time, and he changed his house name from, see, his house's name was this, House of Saxe, Coburg and Gotha. That was the house name, the dynasty's name of the British royal family I'm talking about. Now they are known as the House of Windsor. I hope you're aware of it. Everyone in the British family right now, including Elizabeth II, her son Charles, and his son William, and the future king or queen, they will be carrying this dynasty called House of Windsor, and this is an English surname. See, at first it was House of Saxe, Coburg and Gotha. This name was actually a German dynasty. It was German in origin. So George V changed even the house name in order to sound more British. He refused to associate anymore with his German relatives. His even though they were family, he obviously had German connections, German royal connections, but he abandoned all that German connections just to seem a patriotic king, a true king, because he had to stand with his people. So yes, so this happened in 1917. He took the name of House of Windsor by abandoning his traditional house dynasty's name. So that is one of the major things, and actually you can, if you go to the Wikipedia page, you can actually see a cartoon published by Punch magazine where George V is actually sweeping all his German titles. It's a cartoon actually drawn and published in Punch magazine at that time. So that was what happened in the entire national scene, even the monarchy. People started respecting the fact that they tried to reform or remake something called English or British. See, the British man, the English man, a patriotic man, that ideal was created during this time. And the seriousness, the calm and collective nature of the British was admired. The British themselves, they had no idea what was happening in the war field other than the British men who went for war, who were at war. The people who stayed back at home, they always had this glorious picture about war. Oh, they are doing something heroic. But people who have been actually into war field, they know that there is nothing glorifying about war. So common people always glorified wars. You can see that later when we discuss the poets, English poets at this time also. So majority of the people, the common people like you and me, they glorified, they admired people who were killed or returned from the war field, but only the people who have been to war realize that there is nothing glorified, it's just old men talking and young men dying. So First World War is a lot to think about when we discuss that, because it was a first major war and it was called as a war to end all the wars. But we know that again Second World War happens. So yes, so let's talk more about it. What happened in Britain at that time? We don't have time, or it's irrelevant to talk about whatever happened in entire Europe. So I'm focusing on Britain here because that is our syllabus. See what happened in Britain at that time. Yes, like I said, newspapers, magazines, everything was in high demand because people wanted to know more about war. To read more about wars, so newspapers, magazines, everything featured war in colorful stories in these magazines, these printed reading materials. They were propaganda films. See, you can see that actually the 1916 British film, The Battle of the Somme, I will give the link down below in the description box. That film is there in the YouTube. It's I think more than 1 hour, but you can check out some scenes there. The trench war scenes are there, right, the original footage, because this film was made into a semi documentary style. So yes, this film, The Battle of the Somme, by two official cinematographers, Geoffrey Mullins and John McDowell. So this was a propaganda film. This was made to give the people of England, of Britain, a basic understanding about what was happening in the battlefield. So people couldn't just go there and see what was happening. So they saw this film, they watched this film and realized, oh, okay, this is actually what's happening in the warfield. Obviously, the film did not show the ugly side of the battle. No, it always showed the, you can watch the film by yourself. It is better than me explaining that later. Okay, fine. So let's talk about the popular music at this time. See, two songs were popular, but the one song that sticked is that it's a famous song called, I'm not going to sing, don't worry, but I'll give the link down below in the description box. You can check that out. So this song was by George Henry Powell, and it is set to music by Felix Powell, his brother. And the song is "Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile." So the lyrics of the song reminds the British soldier to forget his worries about his home. I'm assuming about his home and his family. See, put all the worries in that kit, that small bag, and smile. Forget about it and smile. Of course, you are worried about everything, but it's no point getting worried. Just smile. So it goes like this: pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. I'm sorry for the singing, but this is how it goes. You can check that out. So yes, let's talk about literature. The popular war poets at this time, you can take a note here: Wilfred Owen, Robert Graves, Siegfried Sassoon. I hope Sassoon is the pronunciation. We all say Sassoon. David Jones, Ivor Gurney, Rupert Brooke, Edward Thomas, and Isaac Rosenberg. Now, I'd like to mention Wilfred Owen's two poems here because these two poems are really touching, especially for me. But you are free to check poems by all these writers, and there are some really good poems, really painful poems. These poems really portrayed the irony of the war field at that time, because see, poets like Rupert Brooke glorified, his poems were glorified pictures of battles, but Wilfred Owen's poems really showed what was happening in the battlefield. I'd like to recite a few lines that are I found most touching in his from his poem Insensibility. The lines go like this: happy are these who lose imagination, they have enough to carry with ammunition, their spirit drags no pack, their old wounds save with cold cannot more ache, having seen all things red, their eyes are rid of the hurt of the color of blood forever. It's a long poem, and this is, I think, the third stanza. This one, not fully though, the first few lines of third stanza. However, there is another poem by Wilfred Owen. It's Anthem for Doomed Youth. Anthem for Doomed Youth. Yes, the title actually hits somewhere. So, and it's a small poem, and it goes like this: what passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. Orisons means prayers. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs. Their shrill, demanded choirs of wailing shells and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all, not in the hands of boys but in their eyes? Shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes, the pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a droning down of blinds. So this is how the poem goes. I'm sorry, my camera is tilting. Okay. Yes, so there is no need of a clearer picture of the battle, of the ugly side of the battle. You see, men are dying like cattle, and he's mourning the death of young men, his friends, right there. So it's a painful poem, and it's very a popular poem also. So you must remember that. Let's talk about the economy of Britain at that time. Now you should remember that after Second World War, Britain was completely broke. There was no money at all. Britain was in debt. Especially Britain had borrowed a lot of money from America, and it will lead to an embarrassment also. The whole global image of the British man, it will be something very, very embarrassing because of the huge debt Britain owed to US at that time. This is about Second World War. But after First World War, Britain was, even during the First World War, after the First World War, Britain was okay. The economy was okay. See, Britain was spending around 4 million pounds every day at that time. 1916-17, I'm talking about. Every day, Britain spent 4 million pounds for battle alone. And see, while men were out battling, Britain substituted that roles with women employers. So Britain could somehow balance the economy. The production was going on, the industries were functioning, so Britain didn't have any loss, economical loss at that time. So economy was fine, economy was healthy in Britain at that time. Now about the social change, like I said, see, women were to do jobs that men used to do before war. The traditional masculine roles like an industry worker, a factory worker, these jobs slowly became women's jobs. Women were working even before that, don't get me wrong. It's not that women started immediately working during the First World War when men were completely absent from the country. No, women had already started working. Of course, there were governesses, there were seamstresses, and in the court also women were there, and also writers, they started publishing, also started earning money. Was not a problem seen at all, but more women came to work front, to factory jobs, and see the works that required them to move a lot, to sweat a lot, that kind of jobs they started doing. I mean, during this time. And what happened with that? See, they wanted rights also. See, they understood, yes, if we are here working, helping the economy, helping the country, then we want some representation as well. So the Representation of the People Act 1918 enfranchised all adult males as long as they were over 21 years old and were resident householders to vote, and also gave vote to women over 30. who got minimum property qualifications. So this was something important that happened at that time, especially for women. And say this enfranchisement to women were considered as a recognition to their contribution to the war front as the defense workers. They were working as nurses to help these wounded soldiers, and already they were working in the industries and factory, I told you. So it was a recognition for women, you know. And I'd like to talk about fashion. See, some things in this class, when I talk about these things, these are not there in the Poplawski book. But I'm just filling the gaps here. You are supposed to listen to this class, take notes, go to the links that I am giving down below, and also read Poplawski, combine it and make your own notes, make your own essay. This is how it's going to work. Now let's talk about fashion. You know that women wore corsets and girdles, all these tight clothes to make them look that you know, with that perfect silhouette look, with the waist narrow and you know, below the waist huge buttocks and those kind of, in order to get that silhouette they use tight clothes with the laces and all sorts of things. Actually, practically it was very difficult to stay in the costumes at that time. See, I'd like to mention a fashion designer here. His name is, his pronunciation of the name is, I don't know, I'm just imitating the French pronunciation, Paul Poiret. Paul Poiret. But don't worry, you don't have to pronounce the name. The spelling goes like this. Paul, you know the spelling, P-A-U-L. Poiret is P-O-I-R-E-T. Now, he is the man girls should thank this man, not Indian girls but Western women at least, because he is the one who ended the corset tradition in women's fashion. In 1906 he came up with this. He was an independent couturist, couturier, and he was a French fashion designer. See, he came with this fashion, and he was inspired by the Japanese kimono dress. You know kimono, right? Kimono is very loose and it looks like a kind of a kaftan kind of a look, but actually kimono is not that easy to wear. If you watch that film Memoirs of a Geisha, you can see that it's very difficult. The whole dressing of the kimono is difficult, but the look of kimono is very effortless, and that easy, loose, effortless look was taken. It inspired Poiret to French and European fashion. But there was a problem. His dresses, his couture, couture means, you know, grand work of art, costume making. That's the costume, that's called couture. I hope you know these terms. And these couture were very expensive. See, even the cheapest dress by Poiret cost double the salary of a cutlery maid. Cutlery maid was you know, in the kitchen. It was a position in the kitchen, working class, for the working class. Even that, see, even a cutlery maid salary, a month's salary was not enough to buy the cheapest dress by Poiret. So that was a major problem. So he revolutionized women's fashion by abandoning corset and this petticoat and everything. He adapted the kimono loose style, but his fabrics were so grand, so expensive, but those dresses were only good looking from a distance. If you go to, you know, into a close proximity, the manufacturing was not very good. So for the money you pay, the dress you get, the quality was not there. Only the looks, the glittery gold looks was there, but was not a quality material, I mean quality dress. So it was a problem, but anyway, upper class always bought this costume. He was a major hit in French fashion. But then another famous fashion designer came, and you know this person, her name is Coco Chanel, and she was an ordinary seamstress, and I think in 1915 she opened her couture shop, and she came up with an idea. See, during wartime it was very difficult to get fabrics at that time. It is not very easy to get silk and all that fancy clothes, because most of these cloth manufacturing people, they were at the war zone. So getting fabrics was a major concern for French or British or European fashion designers. So Coco Chanel found a fabric, it's called wool jersey. Actually, wool jersey was a fabric that was used to make men's underwear, undergarment at that time in Europe. So this material was used by Coco Chanel to make the women's couture, the outerwear of women's dress. Can you imagine men's underwear, that costume, sorry, that fabric is used for your dress? I mean, yeah, she did that, and so many people laughed at her designs. If you check, if you Google Coco Chanel's fashion and the pre-war fashion, you'll understand the difference. It's like pre-war fashion is like very elaborate, very colorful, lace and everything, corset, very heavy also to walk in. But see, wartime women, they wanted to work in a factory, they wanted to walk in the street as quickly as possible to get into the workplace, right? They don't have time to, just lightly, gait and, just somebody to hold their drain. No. So they wanted lightweight clothes but good manufactured clothes so that it will not torn up easily. See, poorly made clothes will tear up easily. So so it will not be torn up easily. So, and also the material should be some kind of not very delicate also, it should last. So it should be built to last. So that was the fashion of Coco Chanel. See, when she invented her couture, many, including women, many laughed at her designs, calling it masculine, sporty looking. Women who wore Coco Chanel fashion were called as men wearing men's dress, like that. And you know that she made that perfume in 1921, Chanel No. 5, one of the most expensive perfumes in the world, and also one of the first I think synthetic perfumes in the world or something. Yes, so yeah, her fashion was also revolutionary at that time. By the time Chanel, see, when Chanel was getting popular, Poirot or Paul Poirot, who invented these poorly manufactured but grand style costumes, he had actually gone to battle, gone to the war zone. But by the time he came back, he realized that his fashion is so outdated that now Coco Chanel's fashion is the most preferred one by everyone. He tried to reinvent himself, but it wasn't successful. But Chanel was getting more successful. Yeah, we know that Chanel had some problem with her association with some of the boyfriends who supported Germany and all those things, but she survived. She was a really good businesswoman. So these are some of the things that you should know. Let me just take a look. Did I miss anything? No. Yes. So that's about post First World War Britain, British culture, literature, art and fashion. So you have some idea right now. Now go to Paul Poplowski's book and read this section by yourself, and next class I will talk about post Second World War Britain and its culture, its society and its literature. Okay, thank you. Bye.